Ian Roberts, welcome into the weeds. It's an absolute honour and privilege to have you on the show, mate. You are a hero of mine. You are one of the most interesting people you really are, mate. You're an athlete. You're an activist. You're an actor. You're a leader in the world movement. In terms of queer rights and so much more. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us,
mate. That's a very flattering introduction. I do feel like I need to live up to that now, mate. I've been very fortunate in my life. I've been very, very fortunate. It's I'm 60 years old now. It's kind of nice to be in a space and in a place that I'm able to share that a little bit as well. So.
Well, you're fortunate, but you've also worked really hard. You've had a long life of dedication, determination. It's been characterised by courage, brutality, sensitivity, a mix of all those things. You truly are a warrior poet. Let's get into the weeds. You weren't born in Australia. You were born in the UK. You're a 10-pound pom. You came out as a bub.
Absolutely. My parents came out. They would have been 27, both of them. They had 3 kids in tow. There was myself. I was about 1. My brother was a couple of years older. My older sister was a year older than my brother. So yeah, had 50 quid in their pocket. They came out because it was the 10-pound pom thing. They came out literally. My mum and dad came out. They thought they were just coming out from a holiday. And in truth, I mean, it's this is a bit awkward to say, but my how do I put this? I don't want to make it sound awful. My parents left England because there were too many blacks coming. That was their reasoning. Now, let me tell you, it sounds like I've put my family down. Their journey has been incredible. So I just want to, we can talk about that after, but that was, really the reason they left. Because
it was a different time. It was the late 60s.
Yeah.
A lot of changes happening in the world at that time. A lot of immigration and
My parents were very. My dad passed away 10 years ago, but my parents were very working class. There wasn't a lot of. They didn't see a lot of value in education. I know that sounds weird, but my brother and I were only ever going to be at best, and that's not diminishing. I was going to say tradespeople. I ended up being an electrician anyway, but I'm not diminishing that. But and my sisters were going to be secretaries and cleaners. That's kind of.
What was your dad? Your dad was a tradie?
My dad was just a truck driver, and when he came out here, he worked at ICI.
But he was a boxer too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Was he he would have been pretty ferocious? Was he an amateur professional?
Yeah, he was amateur, but he was at one stage the Southern Western champion of the UK when he was 16. He was he could look after himself.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, my dad. That's the first thing. I remember one of the first memories of my dad is my dad sparring with us and teaching my brother and I how to box. That was way before we got involved in any other sort of sport. Yeah.
So working class background, come out to Australia. It's a similar story to my parents. My mum was English, still is English, came out in 68, set up a family out here, 10-pound pom, Fremantle, Mackay, settled in Sydney. But the family settles in South Sydney?
We ended up, we stayed in the hostels at Matraville, stayed there for a couple of years, and we had a housing commission place on Maroubra Beach. Lived there probably 6-7 years and moved to housing commission at South Coogee. And I think
worst places in the world to find yourself, mate.
Absolutely. It was very working class back then. Coogee and Maroubra were very different to what it is now.
A tough place to grow up.
Absolutely.
The streets.
Absolutely, Maroubra was, yeah.
You never got sucked into the Bra Boys?
No, this is before the Bra Boys. This is way before the Bra Boys. The Bra Boy, well, this is not a reference to the Bra Boys, but there used to be things there used to be gangs on the, groups of young men on the street. They used to call them Sharpies back then.
Yep, I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yeah,
there was
the Sharpies.
Maroubra Sharpies and La Perouse Sharpies.
With the skinheads with the little...
They were the ones,
I know. That was scary with the tight denim and...
Yeah. And they jump you for your lunch money.
Yeah.
That's fair income. Like it's fair income. Yeah.
We had them in Tasmania too. They'd beat you up all the time. You get off the bus and they'd chase you if you know. And
literally jump you for your
for $2.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was a bit rough and tumble.
Yeah,
but you
no more so than anyone else was living in the area. Like, you know, there was nothing exceptional. There was nothing out of the normal. So, like, to be honest, my parents didn't really place much value on education. And you know, I say that, but that's you know, it's kind of one of those things that even though my sister ended up being dux of the school when she like. But
Maroubra High.
My older sister went to Randwick Girls High later in life. Julie ended up there was no real value on education. We were going to be tradesmen, or my sisters were going to be secretaries. That was the end prize. For, what we thought was. It was the end prize. Yeah.
But genetics intervene because you're, let's say you're a big unit. You're like
my brother's just as big. He's probably a bit larger than me.
Really?
He's a bigger
What are you? 2 meters tall?
I'm about I'm about 6'4", about 198 centimeters.
There you go, and probably about 20 stone.
I'm 105 stone. I'm exactly the same weight I used to play at right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So genetics intervened. You start playing rugby league. Turns out you were quite good at it.
I was, mate. I think I should. Like, I will say that. Yeah, I mean, I was always, I suppose, a bit better than the average bit. Like, just at sporting things. My brother was a great surfer. My brother's a really good long distance swimmer as well. Obviously there's, it's a good gene pool.
That mix of endurance and athleticism.
Yeah. But I will say this, mate. Sport was always like rugby league and netball for my sisters was always almost like a temporary child minding, babysitting thing for my mum and dad. So that was the era. That was what it was.
Yep.
Off you go to training. It was a very different time. But I come.
That was my parents too. They'd just say, "Look, go and play cricket." They just buy us tennis balls, cricket bats, and they'd just say, "Go outside." Didn't matter what it was, and me and my brother would just play cricket for thousands and thousands of hours.
I get it.
Yeah, just to get it because we would get out from under their feet.
Interesting you say that because such as yourself, my brother and I used to kick the ball around a lot and all that growing up. But when I was, I'm dyslexic, right? So, but I wasn't diagnosed till my late 30s, and I talk about this because this is kind of why sport had a dominant focus in my life. When I was very young, back then dyslexia wasn't a thing. You were just dumb, right? Like it's quite literally. And I've always been really self-aware that I've been same-sex attracted, and it's never been a problem for me. That I've never had an issue with.
You knew that at a very young age.
As far back as I can remember. I mean, I'll tell a story in a moment. But with the dyslexia stuff, the thing that always really shamed me, embarrassed me, that I couldn't read and write. And I mean, right through my life, right from early ages. But it wasn't dyslexia back then. You were just dumb. I was you remember the special classes at school?
Yeah.
I was always in those. I had to repeat.
I was in one too because I was I was hypo, ADHD.
Oh,
I just couldn't sit still, and I was in the class, and we were all just lumped in with. There were kids that couldn't see, couldn't hear, dyslexia. ADHD, whatever you want to.
Yeah, but there was no diagnosis for
no,
for
they were
back
just.
then. You were just different. You're the different. You're in the different class. But I was always really, because I repeated first class, and then I was a year older than everyone in my years going through. I was always really embarrassed about that. I was always really shameful. I was that kid that in class, if the teacher said, "Ian, read, continue reading from page 34," I'd kick the table over or make it about something else and get sent out and I get suspended so many times. But it was always because I was so embarrassed and shameful. And that haunted me my whole life, mate. Like that, not until I went to NIDA, and I'll talk about that later, did things change for me. Like, I was never worried about being same-sex attracted.
It was a bigger issue for you than a much bigger issue.
My head used
the
to
stigma about that than your sexuality.
It was, mate. Wow. It was so I used to feel like it was humiliating, and I used to look at words on the page like they were chicken scratches or something, and things have changed a little bit now. I mean, I'm no Shakespeare, but I can read and write now. But that's only because of the process and the teaching I had when I went to NIDA.
But it was a symptom of the time, the 1980s, 70s, 80s.
You don't talk in the 70s, early 70s.
Yeah, that's right. There was just nothing there.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was nothing there. So that must have made you angry. And is that...
and that's what I'm saying about I was that kid that kicked the tail, but I was always good at sport. And like I excelled in that, and I always got patted on the back for that. And that was not my way out, but that was my way to any sort of...
status or recognition, this sort of thing.
That's a good way of putting it, mate. Yeah.
Were you a mad trainer? Were you dedicated? Like, did you... Because, I've seen... like the fitness regimes of your modern athlete, and they're just ridiculous. Were you a mad trainer, or were you just gifted? And
I wasn't a mad trainer, but I was. I suppose I've always been better, like a little bit better than average, I suppose. But I had we were talking about the gene pool earlier. I had a bit of an advantage. I was always a little bit fitter naturally anyway, and that type of thing. And I did used to capitalise on that and do the extra training. Yeah, but I do remember like sport, and that was always my validation for myself that I could be, that it wasn't embarrassing. That's something I could control. Had a bit of a handle on. Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of strange looking back now. Just like, oh my god, but. Yeah,
that's the way it panned out. So you junior sport, and then you end up at Souths.
Yeah.
You I think you're playing with Mascot, and then you end up at Souths. Pretty young, pretty out, like, and you up against at a very young age. Like you're only, I think, 17, 18, 19.
When I first played my first game of first grade, I was 20, and it was the Charity Shield against St George, South and St George, and. Craig Young, I was opposite Craig Young. And Craig Young used to be like a bit of a superstar for me. Like he was that oak tree type build. And
oak tree.
Yeah,
oh my god!
But he was like he was like there was no change in his shape from his shoulders to his feet.
To his ankles.
Yeah.
Low centre of gravity.
Yeah. Anyway,
made of rock. You must have been scared.
Oh, well, like quite literally. He was a bit of an idol for me. Like I really liked the way he played, but at South, and now
would you just start as a second rower? Or?
No, I started front row. Like I was packing down straight opposite him, and I was almost in awe of him when we first. But the funny thing about this is my first game, right? I'm 20 years old, and I'm playing in a side with like Mario Fenech, Les Davison, Wayne Chisholm, Dave Boyle, all these hard nuts. Like I mean, and we're talking a different era now. Like it's a little, it's a little bit sloppy, not hard. Well, how do I put that in? You know what I'm talking about here? It's
It was mean. They were mean.
Yeah.
They were mean. And like, there was a lot of headshots. There was a lot of punch-ups.
Yeah.
There was, it was
I
brutal.
came in just at that era when all that was being changed over, but I still caught the tail end of that. Anyway, but we had this move.
So this is mid-80s,
This is 1986.
Yeah, ARL.
Yeah, correct. Anyway, George Piggins was his first year coaching. And we had this, I say we had this move. It wasn't a move. South had this call, right? It was called Henry, and what that was Craig Coleman. His nickname was Tugger. The move was Tugger. Henry. Craig had walked through the middle of the as two scrums as we're packing down scrums. He'd walk through the middle of the scrum and say, "Henry's on," and Henry was an all in. Right? We had to start the biff, and I'll never forget. I was opposite like Craig Young. And I was like, oh no, please, this is not happening.
Just a premeditated punch-up.
Yeah, it was the second scrum of the game, and Tuggers walked. Henry's on. I nearly faded there. Like, I nearly passed out.
Where was this, at the SCG?
This is at Redfern.
Redfern, and, oh my God.
And Mario and Bundy, that's Les Davison. Like, they love that stuff, right? So we packed down and boom, it's on. I threw some whimsical, like, silly shots at Craig Young. It was ridiculous. And he just grabbed me by the throat and he nearly put his fist through the back of my head, right? Like, I was just grateful that's all he did. But I do remember that. And that was kind of what I came, like...
That was day one.
That was day one, right? I was almost like, oh, this is so different to playing for Mascot juniors.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Spitting out teeth.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was like.
Because you look at the back at the photos of those games and like they're throwing around this massive like pill that looks like it's made out
Well, the
of
old,
rock.
le- old leather balls.
The
mate,
old leather
when they used to get
balls,
wet,
muddy
They
field.
used to get wet. They were like carrying a brick around.
And there were just specialist people in each team that were just there to knock someone out, really.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate how much the game's advanced now, like with science and all the resources. You can literally carry a ball like out in front of you with one hand now. Like, that's why you have all those incredibly athletic displays of aerobatics and it's wonderful. Like back in the day, like you literally had to hold the ball with two hands. You had
trench warfare too.
Yeah.
People weren't moving at high speed. But like the courage it must have taken, like you must have like the courage to get out there, and to go back for more. Like that is amazing. And you must have, like, there's a part of you must have loved the brutality.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
mate.
I've had a look at your YouTube channel, mate, and there's not a lot on it except your greatest hits. And there's you running up and absolutely poleaxing.
That was a bit later. That was when that was probably like after the 90s you're talking about.
Yeah.
When I was at South, I was, and this is a terrible thing for a gay man to have to say on air, but I was more of a ball player, right? Like with a like it. Yeah, I was. I had a high work rate.
Yep.
But the whole thing about like biffing, creating a real defensive perception as well, which is what I did when I got to Manly. That was a real intentional.
So you started off more as a ball player, running,
absolutely.
hitting up, offloads, all of this.
And high work rate, like like 40, 50 tackles a game plus all the hit-ups and also the offloads, and that was always that's kind of where I'm...
But just elite fitness.
Yeah, that's what kept me a little bit ahead of the pack is I was quite fit when I was young. Yeah.
And so you how did you end up at Wigan? Because I've had a look back. You're playing Souths, and then at the same time you in the off season for for punishment you're going over to Wigan, which again
it was great, but that was
oh my God.
Let's be clear here. Back when I was playing, like there wasn't big money. I mean, there was good money, but wasn't big money. But I mean, we used to train at 4:30 in the afternoon, so everyone could get home from work.
Were you working as an electrician?
I was a sparky, yeah. But that's, I mean, we used to train at 4:30, so everyone could get home from
people
work.
People had a job.
Then go for training.
There might be one or two people that were earning enough in a team to,
I made $11,000 my first year at South, and I thought I was flash. I thought I was like flying, and then Wigan offered me, I think it was about $15,000 for the off season. I'm like, this is like unbelievable. But in saying that, at that time, I think I bought a unit that would cost $42,000, right? So I've just put that in perspective.
You could buy a car for like $3,000, $4,000.
But just to give that a bit of perspective.
Yeah.
But I mean, and as a Sparky, I was probably earning about 30 grand. You know what I mean? Like if that. But we're now talking. It's 40 years ago almost.
Yeah.
40 years ago.
And now we're talking, multi-million-dollar contracts.
I'm not discrediting that, but that was just the era that I grew up. That's just the way it was. Like 50,000 for first grade was absolute pinnacle of sort of money back then.
But you clearly, quickly and clearly became one of the best players in rugby league, and you were courted by Manly. And
that was in 89,
89, and you've jumped the harbour. You've gone over to Brookvale, and there's a lot of Rabbits supporters who still upset about it. But you went to Manly, and massive success. No premierships,
No.
but massive success. End up playing for Australia, City. How many Kangaroos tops did you end up with?
Mate, I don't know. I had about a dozen. I had more than a dozen games playing for Australia, and it was 4 series of Origin. Yeah, but like I said, I was fortunate. I went to Manly. When I went to Manly, I went to Manly. That was a kind of an interesting time too, because when I went to Manly in 1990, pardon me, I was going to come out that year, but I like to mention this every time if I'm ever talking about some impacts and quite pivotal points in my life. In 1990, there was a guy over in England called Justin Fashanu, who came out in 1990 in Premier League.
In Premier League, yeah, he was one of the first in the
He
world.
was
wasn't
the
he?
first. Yeah. Anyway, he got brutalised by the English press and by the English supporters. It was awful. And seeing the reaction that he got, like, kind of, I was like, oh, I didn't want to go like public. Everyone kind of knew I was gay. It was kind of like the worst kept secret. But seeing the way Justin Fashanu was treated was, he retired in '94 and died of suicide in '98. That is, I mean, I'm 60 years old. I'm a 60-year-old gay man. That is such a familiar story to me. Like, in many other aspects.
I mean, back in that time, like looking back, I think Greg Louganis was out. I don't know if he came out, but he was like outed as well.
He came out after.
But there was literally just like one or two that were the tip of the spear, and so you were thinking about coming out.
It was an awful, like, badly kept secret. My partner when I went to Manly was a guy by the name of Shane. Shane unfortunately passed away last year, but we stayed good friends. I was with Shane, and Shane was. Everyone at Manly knew we were gay, but it was just no one spoke about it. And the reason I didn't speak up and out about it was because I kind of thought people should just accept that I'm gay. I shouldn't have to make this announcement.
Yeah,
it's hard. I didn't realise the importance of visibility till a couple of years later. Shane was a guy. The mascots are people that run around the big seagull suits or the big beak and the wings. That's Shane. That's him doing cartwheels and that. And like everyone knew he was like we were together, but it was just a really badly kept secret.
It was a badly kept secret. But were you copying it from other teams? Did the opposition? They must have given you a hard time. There was a lot of. There was back in the day. There was a lot of pejorative terms.
Yeah, mate.
I mean, I would hate to have tried to. I would hate to have gotten you angry.
Yeah,
but
that's kind of what I was touching on before. That's kind of the reason I changed my defensive style. I'm really focused on absolutely cutting people in half. It's just to toughen up that self-image. And you're right, mate. Like I said, I've always been okay being same-sex attracted. I've never had an issue, any internal issue with it. But the thing,
I mean, you touched on it, so let's talk about it. When did you know? Did you just always know?
I've always known.
As soon as you became sort of aware of yourself, you were just going, hey, that guy's hot.
The earliest point I know that I was different was in 1972, and I would have been 7 years old. And then the reason I know this is because I had the memory of watching a show on TV. It was called Checkerboard, and it was the first time. This is gospel. It was first in 1972. It was the first time two gay men had kissed. I actually went to the 50th anniversary a couple of years ago, right, of that. But I was like...
Kissed on TV?
It's the first time two men had kissed on TV. It was on an ABC show, at Checkerboard. Anyway, I'm sat next to my dad watching this show, and I was like, oh, that's what I do with Barry Riley, my best friend next door. It's true. We used to kiss, and but Barry's straight. Barry went on to get married. It was just. But for me, I remember having this thing for Barry Riley, right? And my dad, and I'm just going to use the language my dad said. My dad said, "Oh, those fucking queers make my skin creep," right? And then I was like, "Oh,
hold on.
I probably shouldn't tell Dad about Barry." but that's the moment I just realised. But I've never been uncomfortable with it. I had I've never been internally which I'm really grateful for too, because a lot of people a lot of people do struggle with internal issues about sexuality.
Look, they sure do. Look, and young people especially, now wouldn't know just how terrifying it was for gay people, for the queer community in up until very recently, in the even in the 1990s and 1980s, I grew up in Tasmania. My mum had a lot of queer friends. Right. They had to live in the closet. That they got married to men, and still and I had a gay friend who took his own life because of the conflict there. So that was very difficult. And in Tasmania back then, it was still illegal. It was still
crazy, right?
It was a criminal offence.
It's 1978 here, I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was 1994 in Tasmania. It was still in the Crimes Act, and there was Rodney Croom.
1987, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. They led that campaign, and I remember them so loud and proud, and like being like assaulted, marching through the streets of Hobart, saying, "We're here, we're queer, we're not going to the mainland." And I just couldn't believe that there were these people who would attack these people on the basis of sexuality. I was ashamed of my community. But that's the environment in which you decide in 1995 you're Australian rugby league footballer, you're champion footballer. You come out to the world, one of the first in the world, first in Australia, certainly the first in rugby league. That must have just been a liberating but incredible moment. Tell us about it.
It was actually 94. We went away on the Kangaroo tour, and by this stage, like, everyone kind of knew at Manly I was gay. I was with Shane, Bozo, Bobby Fulton. We but I never spoke about Bozo. We'd never spoken about it. But Bozo had met Shane, and there's the moment that I felt like completely validated as a gay man was on the 94 tour. Was we played the first test. We got beaten by the Poms, and they played out of their skin. They were outstanding. They beat us at Wembley in front of 100,000 people. But my form was really good up until that point, and I didn't expect to get that I'd get dropped. And then anyway, a few days later, Terry Hill was my roommate.
Oh my God, Terry Hill! How annoying would that bloke be?
I've known Terry forever. Yes, Terry passed away as well. It was last year as well.
Sorry to hear that. Yeah, terrible.
Yeah. Anyway, but the phone rings and. So my form's good in that, and I should preempt this little story with when you go away on trips, rugby league trips, the team has to stay together. Like teams, players' wives and girlfriends and all that, and partners can come over, but the team has to stay with them, and the players' wives and girlfriends can't stay with you in the hotel or anything like that. You're as a unit. That's kind of by and by. Everyone knows that rule. So anyway. The phone rings and Terry picks up the phone and he says, he puts it down and he says, Robbo, it's Bozo. And he's doing these ones. He's like slitting his throat saying, you cut. And as a sports person, that's all you're there for, is to play sport, right? So I get on the phone and I said, hey, Boz. He's like, Robbo, you need to come up and see me right now, mate. And I'm like, okay, I'm on my way, mate. And I hung up and Terry looks at me and says, mate, you're gone, mate. And I said, I'm like, fuck. It's just like, we're now talking about sport, right? And I'm thinking, that's all I'm thinking, he's going to cut me. I said, anyway, so obviously Boz is staying in the penthouse, so I get in the lift and go up. And I walk to his room as I get out the lift, and the door's just ajar, right? So it's probably like 6 inches open. And I have a look in, and now anyone who knows Bobby Fulton, now this is one of the original immortals, right? Like a god in rugby league, but he's the calmest. He's calm as a cucumber, mate. He's always really settled. Nothing freaks him out. And I look at him. I look through the door, through the gap, and there's Boz. He's pacing the room up and down. And I stood there. I felt like I stood there for about 20 minutes. I didn't. It was probably only a minute, but he's just pacing it. And I'm like, what's going on? So I knock on the door, and he says, Robbo, come in, mate. Sit on the bed. Then he starts pacing the room again. And after like a few seconds, I'm now thinking someone at home's been hurt, or there's been I'm like, Boz, please stop, mate. Tell me what's happened. And he stops and he looks at me and now I got to tell you guys, this is the hardest conversation this man's ever had. And we're talking about Bobby Fulton, right? Cool as a cucumber, rugby league idol, god, legend. And I said, Boz, mate, just tell me what's happened, mate. And he stops and he looks at me and starts rubbing his chin. He says, Robbo, you know I don't mind, eh? And I was like, what are you talking about, Boz? What do you mean? He says, about you and Shane. And I'm like, oh, thanks, Boz. Thank you. He said, mate, but Shane can't stay with you in the hotel, mate. and I was like, what? I'm like, no, he's not, Boz. He's staying at a B&B up the road. He's ducked in and had breakfast with me a couple of times. And Boz is like, So they've got that information wrong. He hasn't stayed with you. I said, no, mate. He said, oh, great, Robbo. That's all I needed to know, mate. That's all I needed to know. I knew you wouldn't let the team down. He's like, oh, my Robbo, I knew you wouldn't let the team down. But what that's so layered, that conversation. I'm just like, that was the hardest conversation he's had. You know, there's a man who's probably never thinks he's never met a gay person,
let alone talked about it.
Yeah, let alone had to be confronted with it. And
what was happening? Was someone? Were they going to out you? Was the press?
Oh no, I don't know. But I mean, so in that moment, like it was kind of weird. It was, and I felt so validated. Like it was hard to explain. And he's like, "Oh, great, Robbo, great." He said, "Oh, that's all I need to know, mate. Off you go, mate. Off you go." And as I was leaving around the room, before I got to the door, I just turned around and just said, "Thank you, Bose." And we had that moment. Then we kissed. No, we didn't kiss. But it was that. I can't tell you. I just said, "Thank you, Bose." And he said, "Robbo, all good, mate. All good." It was one of I can't tell you it's the most. I wish you could bottle that sensation, that feeling. It's the first time I felt like, and I'm not going to say everyone on tour and
well, someone you love, someone you respect, a hero, just goes, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay, mate.
It's okay,
it's
mate.
Good. I get it. And I'm not going to say everyone was okay with me, and I just lived as a gay man from then on. Like in '95, and then I came out kind of public when we got back in Australia. But yeah, like everyone on tour knew I was gay, and like I said, not everyone was comfortable with me being gay. I've had some really prickly conversations and awkward situations. It's just, I'll never forget one moment where I got into the showers and one of the other guys in there kind of made this funny reaction, turned away from it, and I was like, oh, don't flatter yourself, you're safe. It's just like, trust me, you got no problem, you got no worries. But in saying that, I also did kind of turn it around. I kind of made fun of myself and the situation. It kind of became this bonding moment for the teams I played in. I mean, I went to Townsville in '97. I was made the team captain. Like Tim Sheens, that was like really. I don't know if progressive is the word, but it was so like great for I don't want to say the LGBTQ plus movement, but that moment was like unbelievable. That's like an out gay man playing his contact sport in Townsville,
in country Queensland.
In Townsville, right?
Yeah.
It was like, rugby league is. I keep saying I've been fortunate, mate. But again, I will come back.
But it was a massive movement for the queer community, like around the world.
Yeah.
Because they had someone who was a hero, was in this incredibly macho sport where you have to be, full of testosterone. Well,
the stereotyping went right out the door, right?
The stereotype went out the door.
That's what I was talking about when I was talking about my defence and all that. That was kind of based in all that too, of getting out. I felt like, I feel a bit foolish saying this now because but I felt like I had to be a little bit better or harder
and meaner,
to get the same sort of respect and But I mean.
Well, you certainly did, because if you want to see people getting poleaxed, look at Robbo's YouTube channel, because there's some greatest hits in there. But that was an incredible moment, and clearly showed a lot of leadership. You've been catapulted to the top of the pile there in that movement.
Mate, can I just add something? I will say that the one thing that it did do that made me realise is, in that moment, I also did realise that there's certain things you can't protect people you love from. And I always felt like I was trying to look after my mum and dad and my friends and that, like, because my mum and dad used to go to the footy and they used to hear all that stuff that people would shout. Like even my coming out story, like it was in '87, is about the way it affected my mum and dad. My mum used to work at Qantas. So I'm having a really good year, like in '87 at South. Stories on me in the paper. My mum and dad are hearing, like, they're at the footy, they're hearing all this stuff that's being shouted, and they never confront me with it. Then one day I get a phone call off my dad, and what had happened is my mum was at work. She was a cleaner at Qantas. She's sitting there having a lunch, and there's two boys sitting opposite her on the table, like literally a metre away. They were reading an article on me in the paper. And because I'd been out in the scene and all that, one boy said, and I'll just use the language I use because my mum's a yard away from them, not knowing that that's my mum. like they're reading this article. One boy says to the other boy, "Oh, that's Ian Roberts. He got caught sucking a guy off in Oxford Street, right?" So you can imagine my mum's just like, and just to be clear, that's not true. Yeah, I didn't get caught.
You know?
No, but you can imagine the impact that had on my mum. Like in a workplace, talk about a safe working environment. Anyway, like my mum had to go home. My dad phoned me. I got home from. I was living at Coogee at that time. They were at Botany, and so he said, "Boy, you're going to have to come around and see us." So I went round. Walked in the door. It was like there was a death in the family, and this story will be very familiar to any gay person. They would, like very similar. People will see this as tragic or inspirational, but there are thousands more stories out there, much more inspirational and much more tragic. And my coming out story. So anyway, I walk in the door. It feels like there's a death in the family, and I sit down, and Mum's crying, and my dad says, "Your mum said something at work. We just need to hear you say." These are his words. Perfect. "We just need to hear you say that you're not gay, and that's good enough with us." Right?
Oh no!
And I was like, shit. I said, like, it was in that moment, like I said, every queer person will understand what I'm talking. Like, nah, Dad, I am gay. And my dad's reaction was, "But you play front row." It's weird, right? Like,
I know.
That was his words, right? That was his first words. He's like, "But you play front row."
I know.
My mum's screaming, and it's like, "Yeah," and Dad's like, "It doesn't make any sense. You can't like it, Then but same thing. But it's just, like I didn't speak to my parents for about 3 years. Not that I didn't speak to them; they had a hard time dealing with it. They didn't understand. Like, it was tough. It was, but I was also at a stage in my life where and we spoke about me coming out publicly, and that was kind of the reason I didn't come. I was thinking of coming out from that time onwards, and it was.
But did they come round?
Oh, listen, the best story I can tell you, my dad passed away 10 years ago, but just before he passed away, I was doing this typifies the journey that my parents went on. We were doing a 60 Minutes in it story, and the reporter. Now I have a brother and two sisters, right? A younger sister. My parents had my sister was born over here a couple of years after that. My mum and dad got here. Anyway, the reporter asked my dad. She says to my dad, "Oh, you must be very proud of your son and what he's accomplished," referring to me. And my dad, the best answer I've ever heard. My dad was like, "I'm equally as proud of all my children, but I am so fortunate that I was gifted a gay son because I got to see the world as it really is." I was like, my jaw hit the ground. I was like,
wow.
Where did that come from? Like, who wrote? Like, it was the perfect answer. Right? Like, you can't get a better answer. I was so, like, I can't tell you how. Even when I say it now, I feel so proud of my dad. Like, it's just like, but they had a long journey. But they ended up. My mum and dad became two of our greatest allies. Like, they love my long-term partners, Shane, Andrew, and my partner now, Dan. We've been together nearly 20 years. But they have made them so welcome.
Oh, that's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
That's really amazing because you were such a high-profile figure, and and it really did smash apart all those stereotypes out there about who a gay person was. And what's surprising is when you look back at some of history's greatest warriors, Alexander the Great, all the rest, they were all queer as fuck. Heaps
the
of
thing
them.
is, you're now talking about times when it wasn't scandalised, and it wasn't demeaning to be same-sex attracted. But you're now talking in those a very different way of thinking. It's only been like the last 200 or 300 years, 200 years.
The moralising and the rest has come along, and to massive detriment. And so it's just so refreshing and so fantastic that has changed. And more credit to you because there hasn't. Let's say this: there hasn't been a flood of people in professional sports since you.
We're talking about men's sport, right?
Men's sport, women's sport, very different.
Look at the
Sam
Matildas,
Kerr.
mate. Look at the Matildas, mate, the way they've been embraced.
Yeah, that's right. Women's tennis, who isn't gay in women's tennis?
It's crazy, right? I do a thing for the NRL. I'm part of one of their programs where I go out and speak to the clubs and all that. in and around inclusion, diversity, and belonging. Every time I speak to the women's day, it's fraudulent, mate. It's so imposter syndrome. I'm just like, they're all over this. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The men, I will say, the men's have improved, but it's still a really awkward conversation. And I'd like to think I try to use a lot of humour in it, make it very. But I've been doing that for like about 10 years. About 10 years. It's still an awkward conversation.
It sure is, and they're still like, you look at like the NBA, Premier League, and the rest. There's still
Well, we had Josh Cavaliero in the A-League. He came out about 3 years ago, and Isaac Humphries in the NBL, the National Basketball League. Isaac came out last year or the year before in Australia, which is that's a couple. That's a couple of miles. Internationally, there's probably been about another 10. Just recently, a couple of soccer. There's one. There's been about a dozen internationally.
But there's still work to do there to make sure. And, like we just see that in a lot of these sports teams, there's a lot of cultural issues too. There's a lot of people in them who are different religions and all the rest.
Manly situation.
The Manly situation.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And we saw with, what's his first name? Falau. What was the Wallabies fella?
Winger, played for Brisbane.
Yeah.
Palau.
Is not Isaac Falau?
That's
Anyway, that issue there was that had a real chilling effect, and I think a lot of people looked at that and went, "Wow, those attitudes can still exist."
Yeah, I get there's a clash of cultures and but I like to think, because I've been doing a lot of advocacy work and on this side of things, I kind of feel like the way I like to approach things now, and I feel like people on this side of the table, I always feel like if any sort of negotiation, you need to be understanding of other people's misunderstanding, and if you can start from there, normally you can get a conversation going. But you got to be open to conversation, and that's been the hardest thing. Just being open to conversation and listening. It's like the whole thing with the Manly situation when the 6 boys dropped out, as they have the right to do if they say choose. But in that whole situation, what really struck me most was because Des Hazel was a coach at the time. And anyone who knows Desi Hazel, I play with Desi at Manly, he's an absolute champion, mate. But it's all about winning, right? Desi will do anything it's all about winning. He's one of the most focused, professional,
ruthless,
about winning, player and coach. And I spoke to Desi about a month after that whole situation. It's kind of weird. Even before that, 2 months before that they think about having that Pride round, Manly reached out to me and said, Robbo, what do you think about having this pride? And I was like, I'm a gamer. And my way of thinking is, my first thing was, have you had any pushback? Like, that's where I go to straight in my head, right? Because of my own experience. And they were like, no, it's been good. The problem is I hadn't asked anyone.
Anyone else?
You know what I mean? Yeah. So they probably, hats off to Manly for moving forward with that, because
well, they were a key ally. You had other allies too.
Can I just say about Desi? Desi was all about winning, and I just a month after that all happened, he was disappointed because they lost all their the remaining 6 games after that, and they dropped out of the semi. But Desi, I spoke to him about a month later, and he was obviously disappointed the way the club was going. But he said to me something that just sticks in my mind. He said, "Robbo, you know what I learnt from that whole situation? There are some things more important than 2 points, mate." Mate, to know Desi, it was like one of those moments. I'm just like, oh, fuck, Desi, you get it.
Yeah,
you understand, mate. This is because I promise you, mate, there mightn't have been a lot of kids in the regional areas that heard many stories or listened to the news, but I'm probably those kids who were suffering with their own self-identity and that, they fucking heard that story, mate. They knew what was, you know what I mean? Thank you, Desi, for saying that.
Yeah, there was something more important than, a couple of points. And there has been some good allies for you.
Absolutely.
Like the Channel 9 in their time, Paul Vorton and Sterlo came out. Well, they didn't come out, or did they come out? Hold on.
Support.
They're pretty close, those two.
Yeah.
But they came out and support.
Absolutely.
And they were, they're legends, icons, and, the blokiest, funniest blokes. And yet, stood by.
I can't tell you, mate. I have such a high opinion of Sterlo and Fatty. I remember Fatty copped a bit of flack because there was a show doing the footy show, and he made some remarks about, we heard about it, but you're a good guy. He said something like that.
Yeah.
He said we didn't think, and he copped a lot of flack for it. Now, I love Fat. I have so much respect and admiration for him, but he did cop a lot of shit for it. I remember I've caught up with him since a number of times, but he said to me once, he said, "Mate, Robbo, he apologised for that," and I said to him, "Mate, you don't have to apologise, mate. That was your way of communicating. I'm grateful, mate. You went there.
Yeah.
You spoke about it. You made a point of it. And even he said, he was private conversations since he said, Rob, I did have homophobic, he said, and I said, mate, he talks about working in the film industry and the TV industry for such a long time, and there are so many queer people in the industry. He's realised, mate, I was so stupid. I was so ignorant to it. Yeah, but it's nice that people can own it and move on. I have nothing but respect for Fatty, real admiration, and kind of love Fatty and Sterlo and Blocker.
So you've not only been brutally honest about your own sexuality and courageous there, but you also after football, front rower for 3 or 4 different teams, the Kangaroos, Origin, City Country. You're a bit knocked up, and you walked away from football. I think you retired because you just bashed up.
Yeah,
and you've been honest too about some of your injuries, including some of the damage done to your brain after football.
Mate, absolutely. I've had some testing done. I lived over in the States in 2012 for about 2 or 3 years. I was over there acting, and I had a couple of episodes over there where I kind of lost time. That was I was driving the car, and the next thing I knew, an hour and a half had passed, and I was home. It was almost like waking up, and I was at home. It's hard to describe. That happened twice over there. The second time, I was just where I was living. I was in the shower. The next thing I knew, I was in bed eating dinner type thing. It was, and about half an hour had passed. I was just almost like
you just skipped.
Yeah, I skipped.
What had happened.
And what had happened was, but the thing was, prior to that, in my auditions and that, over there, it's a very different scene in the industry, the acting industry. You can, if you're savvy on the keyboard and that, you can do some internet stuff. You can get auditions. You can be auditioning every day, over there, 2 and 3 times. There's a lot more production over there, and that's what I was doing for 2 years. I was going to all these. I was working quite a bit too, but it was kind of good to get into a situation, prepping for auditions and that as well. But I was always good with auditions too. When I say good, I mean it was sharp. I could get the lines down quite well. But I did start to notice after about 2 years of being there, I was just a bit sloppy in the way my pickup. I just wasn't as sharp, and I felt like I was struggling to remember stuff. And then I had the 2 episodes, and then I actually came back. I came back to Australia because I was a bit worried. Well, I came back because also my dad was quite sick. But I came back. I had some testing done, and my reaction times and that were below standard. And we had some MRIs, and they had detected some sort of trouble. What do they call it? I'm just trying to think the word they use. There had been there's a specific word they use, but there had been some damage.
Yep.
Some trauma type work. So yeah, I kind of see that not as a good thing. I think being proactive about it and knowing about it. I'm all for. I do a lot of cognitive stuff now and testing and online stuff and which I feel like it kind of helps me. I don't know if it does. Maybe it's a placebo. I don't know if it does, but I feel better knowing that I'm doing something about it. Like skill testing and reaction stuff online. So yeah, I mean, I definitely know my memory's not as sharp, and I'm not as sharp but I have no issue talking about it. It's like I had a
Jesus
a fibrillator put in November because I've had a bit of an issue. Some heart issues, and I have no problem talking about it, mate. And the reason I had that put in is because I spoke about Shane, my ex-partner. He died of a heart attack last year, right? And was very young. And when the doctor was talking to me about it, and I mentioned to him about Shane, he said, "Oh, mate, if you'd had one of these fibrillators, he probably would have been okay." I'm like, "Okay, you can put it in, mate." You know. So yeah, I have no issue talking about stuff like that.
Well,
mate.
it's just amazing, mate. You're so refreshing just to have someone who's, so, courageously, brutally honest, and it's the way. I think we should approach our issues. That if we can have an honest conversation about things, that's how we approach the issue of drugs and drugs in sport and all the rest of it. We have a conversation about what's happening. Let's be real about it. Why are people doing what they're doing? How do we reduce harm? How do we care for people and all the rest of it? And so, it's just absolutely fantastic that you're doing that. And look, we skipped forward a bit there because I just wanted to raise that issue. But you left footy and you've gone to NIDA. Now, like the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, it's a pretty prestigious institution. You're there and you've built an amazing career as an actor. You've hit the boards.
I will say, mate, I think we spoke about this before. If I had to survive, feed myself and my acting checks, I'd go pretty hungry, you know what I mean? But I can say I love acting, mate. That is my passion. Even when I was at school, I was always part of the ensemble, right? But I was never one of the leads because I couldn't read and write, right? And that's the thing that always held me back. I was always part of the ensemble. I was always part of the play at school. Even though I was playing sport, and I was always a bit of a show off.
You were, a bit of a show off. You didn't mind 100,000 people at Twickenham, or the crowd at NIDA. And I'd be more frightened of the inner west theatre scene than.
I was about 32 when I went to NIDA, which is much older than. I didn't expect to go there. But quite literally, my car. I'd retired from Cowboys. I was struggling, and I was feeling bad. Like, even the whole retiring thing, when you're 32, like to think that you've peaked when you're 32 is a bit of a head. It's a head fuck.
A lot of people are just starting.
They're just finished uni now with the rest of my life. Like I was, and I was looking to go.
And it's a big problem with a lot of athletes, isn't it? Like the life expectancy of someone in the NRL, most of. Are out by the 24, 25.
Yeah, I was looking to go back on the tools as an electrician. That's all. But anyway, I quite literally was driving by NIDA one day. I knew about NIDA. I didn't really know how prestigious it was, but I just knew it was an acting school. I was driving by NIDA on Anzac Parade there at Kensington, and my car broke down just up the road from it, and I had to walk by NIDA to go to the service station to get someone to fix the car up. And I thought I'd just pop in the night and see if there's someone in there that I might be able to get some lessons on, maybe get back into some community theatre or, some ensemble. So, they say there's always that one teacher in your life that changes your life. Well, this is my story about that. So I went into NIDA and I told the person at the desk, is there anyone here I can see about maybe getting some acting training and this, that and the other? And she put me in touch with a man named Kevin Jackson. I love Kevin Jackson. I can tell you he was an absolute saviour for me. Anyway, so I met Kevin Jackson, who was I don't think he was head of acting then. He was one of the acting teachers. And Kevin knew of me from my rugby league days. Right? Kevin was a gay man, but he wasn't really a sporty person. But so he knew of my part. And I said to him, I told him, I wouldn't mind getting back into some community theatre. And he said, "Oh, okay, well, give me a cold read." He took me into the room and gave me the book to read, this cold read, and I stood there humming and just he could see that I'd gone all red and that hot feeling in your head, and I was just so embarrassed again. And he's like, when you're ready, and I just said, "Oh mate, I'm so sorry, I can't read and write." And he was like, "This is the first time this has happened." It's almost like that Bozo moment. He said, "Oh, are you dyslexic?" And even though I'd heard of that, I'd never been diagnosed. I got diagnosed a few years after that, but. He's like, "Oh, you can't." I said, "Oh, mate, I can't read and write." He said, "Oh, you just," and I said, "Oh, I don't know, but probably." I said, "I've never been able to." He said, "Oh, that's not a problem." He said, "What we'll do is, we'll record it on the tape, and you go home and learn it. Just listen to it, learn it, and then when you're ready, come back and No, like it was the first time it was not a problem. It was so like not a problem at all that I was like kind of blown away by that. And so I did that, and he took me under his wing a bit, and like I trained with him for about 6 months, and then he suggested me doing the auditions. He said, why don't you go? I said, I'm too old to be in this place, because most of the people are in their early 20s, most of the students. And he's like, if you're old, if you're good enough, you're old enough, like regardless if that's young or old. So I did that, and I got in. And then for the first 12 months of my first year at NIDA, Kevin and I, because we're doing all these recordings for me, like it was, but I also learnt phonetics. And I was introduced to phonetics, which is another way of reading, and it's all sound based, and every symbol has a particular sound, and that's how I kind of learnt to read and write. Like it was a very slow, gradual over the next 5 years, but it really changed. But his taking that time to do that with me changed my life. Like it was one of those moments, just like,
amazing.
Yeah, it was just, it is one of those moments of like teacher. My partner Dan's a teacher, teaching, but like I love teachers. Like teachers, education. You talk about Qtopia. That's why we started it 10 years ago, mate. It's like education is our greatest sword and shield.
Oh, it is. There is always one. I remember I had a teacher, Mr. Johnson, year 8, in lots of trouble, hypo, always in very mouthy, always in fights, always getting bashed too, because I was really skinny and mouthy and pretty quick, but not always. And I was always getting bashed and all the rest. He said, look, you need, to focus. You should write. You should write things down. What's going on in your head, write it down. And when I did, and I started to concentrate on something, and like all the sort of noises went out of my head, and it was just a really calming thing. And he was a guy who was he was also the PE teacher, and also amazing windsurfer and all the rest. And he was a guy who then got me into writing, and that really changed changed my life.
True, mate,
one good teacher, and it's just that intersection, bang, different path.
Teachers, nurses, and our first responders are the most underappreciated, underrespected, underpaid, like class of people in our community, mate.
Well, credit to Chris Minns, I've got to say, here in New South Wales, the fact that he's come. I keep saying coming out. Chris Minns has come out. Coming out, Chris. He's taken New South Wales.
I shouldn't have said underpaid. I didn't actually. I meant underappreciated.
Well, they were underpaid and they were underappreciated. Yeah. Now our teachers in New South Wales have gone from the worst paid in the country to the best paid, and now we've had this big change in the rates of just outcomes in the education sector, and teachers flooding into New South Wales and filling up those classrooms. So a good result there. So you've had some success. You're a very humble bloke, but I've seen you in Furiosa. I've seen your head pop up there. There's a great scene in what's it, Mr. In Between.
It's a good show, isn't it?
Yeah, great show. If you want to check it out, I reckon you're great in it.
Not that.
As a dying gangster, you're fantastic, mate.
You do that a rap. That's Scott Ryan's the guy that is a writer and plays the lead in that. But that is such an underrated show. It's almost like a crossover between like Underbelly and Chopper.
It is.
I mean? It's like a real dry, strange humour as well.
It is a fantastic show. I don't know if it's on Stan or Binge.
It's on one of those two.
It's on one of those two, but Mr. In Between is really good. And you do a really good job of getting like shot up and getting killed.
I'm always dying on stage.
You're always really good at getting blown to pieces and all the rest, which is really good. But you've also started writing, haven't you? You've written your own play.
Yeah,
tell us about that.
It's a story about a young guy I knew, Aaron Light, who was murdered in '97. It was my friendship and relationship with him. It's just a really dark. It's a really dark story, but there is also some light there. It's hard to explain. Yeah, I'm really proud of that. Like we're looking to get that produced probably and on stage, hopefully in the next 6 months.
That is fantastic because I am familiar with that story, and it is it's a hard part of.
It's very sad.
It's a sad part, and it's a sad part of, like New South Wales' story, how we didn't deal with some of these perpetrators. And some of the things that they did in our society. And one of the things I've been doing in Parliament is, advocating for the victims of, child sexual abuse and also abuse generally. So good on you for putting that story out there. And I look forward to being out there. Again, more courage from you, mate.
Mate,
leaning into it. That was a difficult time for you, I understand.
That was absolutely the most difficult time of my life. And still is, mate. Like it was. It's just a sad story. He was just such a wonderful kid, mate. He was such a good kid. It was,
really terrible. And it's one of the things that people don't recognise. When there's a victim of a crime, it's not just them. There's literally hundreds of people that their lives are impacted by that, and especially if there's an injustice and someone has gotten away with it. It's absolutely shithouse. And so good on you for putting that out there. And I read the reports of the coroner's inquest, and you went there and stared down that motherfucker.
Yeah,
so
that
good on you.
That whole coroner's inquest, I was involved. Went on for like 7 years. It was so drawn out. There was just. Yeah, it was very dark.
Well, good on you. There's a lot of healing it can come from writing things down.
And that play is a real celebration of Aaron's life. Like it's like I know it's very dark material, but we end in a really good place.
Well, good
I'm
for
really
you.
Happy with it, mate.
Now let's talk about what you're doing right now, because you're athlete, you're an actor, you're an activist, and now you're the director of Qtopia, aren't you?
And so I'm not a director anymore because I've been doing it for 10 years.
You've been doing it for 10 years.
I've stepped away now.
You've stepped away.
Yeah.
But tell us about...
I still volunteer there all the time. I'm still there all the time anyway. So.
Well, tell us about Qtopia, because it's the big queer museum in the heart of Sydney. Absolutely amazing. If you haven't been there, you've got to check it out. Tell us about Qtopia. Tell us about the vision where it's at now. It's
at Taylor Square. It's the old police station up in Taylor Square.
What an appropriate place for it to be, and what a beautiful building.
Well, that's the original building where the 78ers, where Mardi Gras started, got dragged back to. And
bashed.
When we originally were told we might be able to get the premises, there was a lot of pushback from the community as well, because that police station has a very dark history.
Oh, doesn't it?
But I think we made the right decision. Well, I feel like we made the right decision. And the fact that it's also a bit of a healing process as well. You're taking ownership of that place. But, I mean, Qtopia, the idea of a queer museum has been around. I mean, I've been out in the scene for 40 years. It's been around at least that long, mate. I've been involved in 2 other unsuccessful attempts. They weren't failed. They were just unsuccessful. We kind of learned a lot from them. In fact, the most recent one before Qtopia was when I was first on the I was helping Linda Scott with so that would have been 2010, I think. And Linda and I were campaigning for have an AIDS museum at the.
Linda Scott, the Sydney City Councillor at the time.
Linda Scott.
Yep,
yes,
that's right.
Yes.
Because your partner Dan's, he's active in politics, isn't he?
He's
organiser in the Labor Party and the rest.
Yeah, he's I think Dan's the president at the chair at the Surrey Hills branch. Anyway, but so how Qtopia started, but like it, and like I said, there's been talk of a queer museum for such a long time. I mean, we were Linda, Scott, myself, and Dan, my partner, were at a vigil for a young guy. This is 10 years ago, 2016, for a young guy by the name of Tyrone Unsworth. Tyrone, and I don't know what it is about this particular story, but Tyrone was a 13-year-old boy from Queensland who was being bullied at school for being gay, and he told his friend one day he was just tired of it, and that if he had to go back to school, he was going to kill himself, and he died of suicide the next day. It's just, and I don't know what it is about that story, because that's another familiar story to me.
Well, I know what it is about that story. And just by the way, if anyone out there's, feeling triggered by this, like I lost my son to suicide, there's help out there. Look, reach out, Lifeline, talk to people, all the rest. So tell us about Tyrone.
Mate, so it was just one of those moments where we were at this vigil. It's just like, we just come off the back of that unsuccessful attempt at the other museum. we're like, how do we get a hook here? How do we get some traction? What? And it was all like Linda and Dan. I said, well, education. Like, it's got to be around education. You know, we've got to approach as many ministers as we can about getting some sort of museum, some educational outreach program to schools, and have it based in and around education. So that's what we did for the next 4 or 5 years. Because we're all Labor people, we were just asking every Labor minister we knew. And they were all really successful. But bearing in mind, at that point in time, both federally and state-wise, Labor weren't in power. So, but then when it looked like there was being a change about 4 years ago, bumped into another friend of mine, David Paulson, who has sadly just passed away quite recently.
There's a memorial for him there now, isn't there? Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, David Paulson, like, I think, leading advocate for, gay men living with HIV.
Yeah, he was one of the original HIVs. He's been a survivor. Like, he's been HIV for a long time and been put through multiple testing and like multiple. So he's been a champion. Anyway, so 4 years later, bumped into David. David, now there's a lot of Davids in this story. David Paulson had just come from a meeting with Dorrie Cooper. Now, Dorrie Cooper was the wife of David Cooper. David Cooper was led the medical research and the AIDS epidemic through the 80s. He was internationally, he was recognised and very much a champion for HIV, its resourcing and treatments. And Dorrie had told David Paulson that David Cooper had wanted to have an AIDS museum. Anyway, so David mentioned that to me, and I told him that we'd just come off a couple of years previous of an unsuccessful attempt at having an AIDS museum. Like, there wasn't much interest, like, politically. I said, like, let's get together, mate. The education stuff is what's going to win us this, but obviously the AIDS stuff is a part of our story. So we kind of like worked together from them. There looked like being a change of government, and that's when we hit the Mims government up. They were right on board with it. They gave us the police station. The feds got on board.
You got a key ally there too in the Mims government with Penny Sharp. Great mate of yours and mine.
I love Penny.
Penny Sharp, a leader in the queer community, and leader of the government, House Minister for about 10 things.
Yeah, I always like to say, given different situations in a different universe, Penny and I would be husband and wife.
You'd be a pretty powerful couple. Don't worry about that.
She's a wonderful, wonderful human being. So. The government, the state government backed us financially as well. They gave us the premises. The feds also were fantastic. Tanya Plibersek has been an absolute champion for us as well. They donated $1.5 million as well. And our first big donation came from two friends of mine, Sarah and Lachlan Murdoch, and their foundation. That's what really got the ball rolling for because with their backing, that was prior to any of the other to the state or the feds getting involved. They've been wonderful, like the Murdochs. So we're now open. Been open for a year. Still trying, always raising money. Our education.
It's
program.
3 sites, isn't it? There's a couple of different sites, there's
the main building in Forbes Street, 301 Forbes Street, which is Taylor Square. We also have the substation just in front of that, and there's a toilet block. They're actual exhibitions. They're part of, but they are across the road from the actual from the old police station. We're still trying to raise money, but our education stuff. We had been hopeful of that being rolled out a while ago, but that hasn't happened. We're hopefully rolling that out very shortly. So it's, this is education. That's been my tagline, and this all started from the vigil from Tyrone Unsworth 10 years ago. It's just like, but in saying that, we're here now. The museum's there because it's no one person or one situation or one period of time. You've only got to look back over the 70s, 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. Qtopia is here because all those gay men that were thrown off cliffs in and around the eastern suburbs and the northern beaches, dykes on bikes. For anyone who's ever thought
78ers, the whole thing.
78ers. Like, this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, all those people who just resisted.
There's no one cause, one person, or one reason. Like, this is just all that, put in a pot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's still more work to do.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the process, isn't it? Reducing stigma, educating people, and empowering people, and making people aware that that it's just okay.
Yeah.
You are the way you are, and we should just be aware of our prejudices and work on them. People have them.
Conversation, mate.
A conversation.
Everything starts with I know that sounds tacky, but I'm like, mate, I'm happy to talk to anyone. Like, it's like, everything starts with a conversation. Yeah, we can agree to disagree respectfully as well.
Exactly. Well, that is a great note to finish things off, mate. You're an inspiration. Those conversations you had with your dad, Bozo, and the rest, you've been an absolute champion, courageous, very, very brave on the football field, but in your personal life as well. You've lent into a lot of things. So it's been an absolute privilege and honour to have you onto the podcast. Really appreciate it. And more strength to your gigantic arms, mate. No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, mate. Again, I've been very fortunate. Thank you.
Thank you. Good on you. Thanks, Ian.